They run the Wi-Fi. They deliver emails to cells to keep the messages up to tell cells what to do. Hormones are quite extraordinary and that they're about sexy and reproductive things and aging things, but they also run the whole internet of your body, and this has not been appreciated by medicine. I really chafe at the term estrogen dominance because it infers that estrogen is a dominatrix of the worst kind. There's a lot of emotional bias against hormones and against estrogen, and it doesn't hold up if you read the science.
Welcome to The Trusted Pharmacist, where you'll learn the truth about how the body works.
Welcome back to The Trusted Pharmacist. I'm your host, Steve Hofford. And if you've ever heard that estrogen is dangerous, you better hold on because today's episode is probably going to challenge all that. Hormone scholar Lindsey Berkson reveals the latest science that actually shows how hormone therapy can actually be safe and actually has benefits in terms of your brain, your gut, your sexual health, and just a better you. And so I really look forward into jumping in this with her today. And just kind of as a welcome, Dr. Berkson, thanks so much for joining me.
Thank you so much for having me. It's always great to have a dynamic conversation on the most powerful signaling molecules in our body, hormones, with somebody that helps actually fulfill scripts and get hormones to patients. And I honestly would not be who I am today without the brilliance and the service of compounding pharmacists. So I really want to thank you.
No, thank you so much. That is so kind. I probably wouldn't be where I'm at today without your education because believe it or not, Dr. Berkson taught me A for M probably 5, 6, 7 years ago. I mean, she's only like 25 now, so she was super young when she did that. But it's one of those things, just so that people know who you are. Dr. Berkson is a trailblazer in functional medicine who's passionate about helping and understand how their hormones and gut health shape every part of their well-being. And she has a true gift, and that gift is making the complex science, making it easy and understandable and translatable into practical, life-changing solutions. So let's jump in. I'm going to ask you something just right off the bat because I love how you're out there on things. If there was one piece of medical education that's taught in medical schools today that you're just like, we got to squash this myth and stop teaching that, what would that be?
That hormones are safe, that they cause more protection than they do trouble. And the problem with medicine today, there's so much of a growing body of knowledge that it's compartmentalized into various genres of medicine that doctors take board certifications and tests in, and then they become adjudicators. So we've got gastroenterologists, we've got neurologists, but for hormones, we basically have urologists, gynecologists, and endocrinologists. And the real information that we've discovered is urologists and OBGYNs don't know very much about sex hormones. In fact, there was a survey in 2023 and only 31% of gynecologists had ever taken a hormone course, and it was only 6 weeks long, and only 31% of them had taken it. So after the Women's Health Initiative, we stopped really teaching hormones in med school, and then we kind of pushed it aside to the urologists and gynecologists who mostly hand out scripts for birth control pills and synthetic hormones. So the real understanding that hormones infiltrate all body systems, your brain, your heart, your kidneys, your blood vessels, they're the most powerful signaling molecules in your body. They run the Wi-Fi. They deliver emails to cells to keep the messages up to tell cells what to do. And you know how maddening it is when you open up your computer and your Wi-Fi is dead. You can't get anything done. And that's what pathology and aging are. They're the freezing up of your hormonal Wi-Fi. So I wish that med schools would teach the intimate relationship of hormones with all body systems. If we do have people that caretake hormones, let's really educate them in that and understand that addressing hormones can address hormone issues, but many other tissue issues. That would be my mantra.
That's awesome. And I love what you just said. Medicine is so siloed nowadays. And the idea of, like you just mentioned, a urologist and an OBGYN not even knowing hormones, like that just seems so foreign. Like that doesn't make sense.
Doesn't make any sense.
Or then you get like an endocrinologist. I get that all the time. It's like people who want to take like a functional or root cause approach to their medicine or health, like personalized medicine. Like I want to go find an endocrinologist to practice that. But you just mentioned even they don't understand all the hormones, or at least they're not taught to look outside that box. Everything in medicine is so boxed in. And if it's not in your box to play with, you don't get outside that box. And that's really kind of scary on that. I mean, and I've heard you talk about that before.
It's so true. So I've been very frustrated with what doctors know and don't know. So I decided to put on my own CME course for medical doctors and nurse practitioners. And David Brownstein and I got together in 2024, and we put on an 18-hour CME course for MDs and nurse practitioners. We eventually got CME credits for other genres of medicine too. And we ended up having 300 doctors from 7 countries, of which many were urologists and gynecologists. And they would say to us, I know nothing about hormones. I've been scared to death to deal with hormones. I just tell my patients avoid hormones, or I wasn't sure what to do about hormones. But now with this course, I feel like I'm more on stable ground. So it was enlightening to us to see them say, we weren't trained in hormones. We were told to think that they mostly cause problems, or we hand out scripts for some of the, pharmaceutical ones. So this is something that patients aren't aware of, but now things are changing, and I can share with you why they're changing or not changing. But it's very difficult to find doctors that are well trained in hormones and know how to test them, treat them, and track them. The 3 T's: test, treat, and track. So we can address that a little bit, but finding the best provider that can help you with your hormones is helpful for your hormones, but health of many of your other tissues.
That's excellent. And like you said, I agree. I'm all for hormone replacement, but then there's also that test, treat, and track part that's also important, because they are hormones and they affect everything in the body. Let's jump into estrogen. Let's just go for that.
Okay, I just want to make one comment about affecting everything in the body, and then we'll jump into estrogen. For example, progesterone helps lungs heal from damage and protects your lungs. So if you've got asthma, if you've got congestive heart failure, but we learned this in COVID, because they took men who had severe COVID at Mount Sinai. They had men in the ICU, patients that had severe COVID, and they gave half of them standard of care, and the other half they gave standard of care. And they gave these men a shot of progesterone, 100 milligrams twice a day. And they looked to see who got out of the hospital quicker, who didn't get that ground glass damaging effect from COVID, and who got long COVID and didn't. And the men that were on the progesterone got out of the hospital quicker, less complications. Their lungs didn't get that ground glass appearance, and they had less long COVID, because progesterone helps heal the lungs. So hormones heal hormones, but hormones also heal tissues that hormones send Wi-Fi emails too. So I just wanted to make that kind of clear.
No, hold on. You made my ears perk up. So you're trying to tell me a guy don't have a uterus, but he needs progesterone. And then, so ladies, obviously, without a uterus, definitely don't need that to protect their lungs. Is that correct?
That's the old time. The old bias in gynecology was, if you don't have a uterus, you don't need progesterone, because they didn't think progesterone did anything else but protect the uterus from too much estrogen. But in actuality, your brain makes progesterone in 6 different areas. You have progesterone producing enzymes all over your body, and men and women all have the same hormones, just in different ratios. And we now today, a forward-thinking doctor that studied this and is up on this, which not that many are, will look at all the hormones even in men. And men can benefit incredibly with hormones. For example, the real bugaboo of growing older in men is an enlarged prostate, where they're up peeing all night. Well, one of the things that helps men with that is higher doses of progesterone. Not the only thing. I mean, there's a whole protocol. But so hormones are quite extraordinary, and that they're about sexy and reproductive things and aging things. But they also run the whole internet of your body. And this has not been appreciated by medicine, because it got all divided up into these little boxes. So we're going to chat about that a little today.
Yeah. And thank you so much for bringing that up about progesterone. And since we're on that, let's just kind of jump into that, like you said, because I do a lot of social media posts. And believe it or not, to this day, I bet if I do a post on progesterone, I'll get 15, 20 of that exact question. Oh, my doctor says I don't need it. And so I appreciate you talking about that. And that's, like I said, it'd be great if they could just suck every progesterone receptor out of your body when they take out your uterus. But you and I both know better than that. But I thank you for highlighting that. That's super important. And, talking about progesterone, since we're on that, you mentioned something in a lecture I heard once about the effect. And we know sleep and anxiety, to me, those are the main things, calming and things like that. But there's some unique things about progesterone I find really cool. You mentioned something about its protective effect on the gut. We know so many people have leaky gut right now. Talk about that effect on progesterone. I found that very fascinating with so many ladies, 30 and older who don't either have progesterone or if they don't replace it, they definitely don't have progesterone. Tell me about that. I found that very interesting.
Steve, that is a great question. So when we get older, we're a lot more prone to gut issues. Women get a lot more irritable bowel syndrome, or the one way you can test this other condition is only by biopsy, punch biopsy during colonoscopy. But if you get microscopic colitis, and you can only figure that out if you ask your gastroenterologist when they're going in for a colonoscopy, can you take a few little punch biopsies so I can see if I've got this microscopic? You can only see it under a microscope. You can't see it visually. And women are much more prone to all that as they get older because they're more prone to leaky gut. Why? So a healthy gut wall is a series of columnar and cells that are called enterocytes. They're stand-like soldiers, shoulder to shoulder. And they open when food broken down well enough should go through, and then they close. So a healthy gut opens, closes, opens, closes. One of the ways it stays closed is with sticky adhesive proteins. These sticky adhesive proteins have all kinds of fancy little names like occludins and junctional adhesive molecule A, but they're little pieces of bubble gum that are good bubble gum. Maybe they taste like your favorite flavor and they help keep your cell walls together. Well, estrogen and progesterone boost the production of these sticky proteins. So when you have enough estrogen and progesterone, your wall opens and closes and opens and closes. Now, there's some nutrients that are involved in that because hormones are intimately involved with nutrients. But as we get older and we have less hormones, and we also digest less well because we make less digestive enzymes, we tend to have gut wall cells that don't stick together so well. And part of the reason is because you're insufficient in hormones.
Very cool. That's awesome. And I appreciate that. A lot of people don't put that hormone connection with gut health. And that's so important. I know we'll talk about this more because most women either just notice skin issues or hot flashes or the visible things on the outside, but there are so many things going on the inside that hormones affect. And that's just one of those things. Like for me, for many years, I didn't put that important part about gut health and hormone health together.
There's one more, Steve.
Yeah.
So everybody talks about how you have 80% of your immune system in your gut, right?
Right.
So what exactly is that? What is it, like some fists lining your gut? When something comes in, they're going to hit it? Or what is your gut immune system? And the answer to that is your gut immune system is this layer called secretory IgA that actually, when food comes in, so the outside environment gets into the middle of you and your body's got to figure out if it's friend or foe. So the secretory IgA licks what gets in. It licks it and it figures out friend or kryptonite, foe, and it tells tells the rest of your immune system what to do. Testosterone upregulates secretory IgA. And that's why men have much less of autoimmune diseases than women, because they got a lot of that gut immune system working. And that's one of the reasons that as women get older, testosterone replacement makes a lot of sense to keep your immune system working. And it's another reason that exercise is so beneficial for us, because the more you exercise, the more testosterone and secretory IgA you make right after resistant exercise.
I love that. That's really, really good. So sticking with progesterone, let's kind of turn a little bit on that. To me, progesterone is progesterone is progesterone. And if whatever you're taking doesn't say progesterone, it's not progesterone. It's a synthetic progestin, and they don't do the same things. And you know as well as me, thank goodness the Women's Health Initiative study is starting to get debunked more. It's getting out more. And to me, it is the progestins in that Women's Health Initiative study that started all the problem. And then honestly, estrogen got thrown out like the baby with the bathwater. It all was like, progestins are bad. It's all bad. Let's just throw it out. Explain to people exactly what is progesterone versus a progestin and how that all goes wrong.
Boy, that is such a good point to bring up, honestly, because Even in the medical literature, people are throwing around progesterone, progestins, and a lot of the scientists don't even know the difference, but it's a huge difference. So natural bioidentical progesterone looks exactly like the hormone molecularly. It's a Xerox copy. In the olden days, we would call it a Xerox copy. Maybe that's not, maybe it'd be a screenshot. It's an exact screenshot. That's a more contemporized word. And you could tell, I'm going to be 77 in a month or two. Yeah. So, I mean, anyway, and I've been on hormones now for almost 30 years, thank God. So my brain is still working. But so the progesterone is your natural molecule that looks like the one that your body is used to. It's used to it. It can break it down. It can get its signals. It's used to the language that natural progesterone delivers. Then you get progestin that's speaking Swahili. It's not exactly the same. It has a totally different shape. And the reason the shape was altered was to make it a brand new molecule that shareholders in a company could have stock on and make profit on. And you can't really do that with an identical molecule. But the problem is that when they altered the structure shape, you really don't know how your body is going to deal with it. Let's take the Depo-Provera shot. That is the most common, let's just do birth control. You can take this shot. It's really easy. It's convenient. What's your price for that convenience? Now they know that if you read the label of Depo-Provera, which is a synthetic progestin, it can cause bone loss. It most often causes bone loss. And even in the label, it says that this bone loss is most often irreversible, that even over time, it's very hard to gain this bone loss back. Well, that's shocking. You want to take a hormone that makes you lose bone? Well, wait, there's more. It also increases your risk of breast cancer. In fact, one of the number one causes of the increased incidence of breast cancer in younger and younger women, which means under the age of 50, and that's been happening statistically since 2016, is because so many young women are on long-term synthetic birth control. In fact, there's no study that doesn't say synthetic birth control increases the risk of breast cancer. But in July of 2023, our FDA made synthetic progestins available over the counter for any young woman to walk in and purchase them. But women needing and wanting bioidentical hormones in their 40s, 50s, 60s, and older, they have a much harder time getting it. So something isn't making sense here when you translate all this into information. But there's more. Besides the risk of breast cancer, besides the risk of poor relationship decisions, there's lots of discussion of women on birth control not being able to make the same mental, higher executive decision making, but weight gain. If you read the studies on Depo-Provera, and I write on these things almost every morning on Substack. I just did a Substack on this a few days ago. Within the first 2 years, there's a statistical increased risk of gaining 5.5 pounds. And if you stay on the synthetic progestin, Depo-Provera, for 6 years, you can gain a statistically proven, irreversible 16-pound weight gain that you just can't get rid of. But if you go to your doctor saying, do I need a GLP-1 or what do I do for weight loss? Nobody's thinking about the Depo-Provera shot that you've been getting for birth control.
That's unbelievable. And just so people understand, it's the Depo-Provera. It's the synthetic progestins in all oral birth control pills, which even mixed with oral estrogens is probably even worse. It's
Right.
all the progestins that are in your IUDs. Yes, there's probably less systemic effects, but some of that does get absorbed. So it's across that whole entire gamut. And I don't think many women are told about that when they start these things. Would you agree with that?
That is so true. I was just lecturing to a group of 350 dentists and periodontists in Greenville, South Carolina, and about the role of hormones in the mouth. And nobody in the audience had ever thought about the role of hormones. And I said, well, just take a real life example. When a young girl gets on birth control, it stops her ovulation and pretty much stops her hormones. So she's hormone insufficient and her Wi-Fi is faltering. She's working with a really poor signal with her Wi-Fi. And so your gums are lined with estrogen receptors. Do you see patients who are on birth control pills who have intractable periodontal disease. You keep trying to fix it, but it won't respond. How many of you see this in the audience? And they all raised their hand. And I said, that's because this woman it's the same way in a menopausal mouth. A young girl on birth control or a menopausal mouth is more prone to recession and periodontal disease that doesn't respond to treatment because their hormones are so low unless they get on hormone replacement. And you don't think of that, but on birth control, it wipes out your hormones. So you're losing all of the protective effect that your body is supposed to be getting from hormones. But boy, they push those birth control pills on young girls. So they all said, well, what's our choice? What do we do? And nobody had ever mentioned barrier methods to these women. They don't hear about diaphragms. They don't, and there is the condom, but not a lot of people like to use the condom, but barrier methods with spermicidal jelly is a very good way. And the reason that they're not discussed in practice is because doctors make a lot more money with procedures. So to place an IUD in you is going to make more money for that provider than not, but you're putting an irritant in this very fragile tissue that even if it doesn't have synthetic hormones on it, although ideally that would be the better kind to get, that was just mechanically blocking the egg and the sperm meeting and mingling. But nonetheless, barrier methods are really fabulous to use, but they're hard to get fitted for these days because nobody wants to give them to you because procedures are where it's at, and placing an IUD in is a money-making procedure.
That's a great call out. You bring up something about the periodontal disease and how the dentist and then will work with try to get healing of the gums. One of my best friends who actually does PRP and Prolo, and if you don't know what that is, that's where they actually inject I know you know, but for listeners, so when they inject basically into joints or different tendons and to allow the body to heal itself naturally, but he actually got into hormone replacement because he found out for those patients that had balanced hormones, they healed and the PRP and Prolo worked. But if they didn't have balanced hormones, he didn't see the benefit. So it's the craziest thing. He's got into hormone replacement because he's had to, because he wants his PRP and Prolo to be effective. And you get that down to the true nutrients of what happens with that. So that's really kind of cool as far as that goes. I'm glad you called that out about dentists. All right. So let's pivot a little bit. So because we live in a progesterone deficient world, what's happening now is we see estrogen dominance. And I see so many videos of like estrogen this and estrogen bad that, but you're right. Estrogen's kind of gotten like a vilified or a bad guy. But you know as well as me, it's the balance of estrogen and progesterone that's important. So estrogen's kind of turned into a bad guy because so many people have low progesterone and that balance is off. But I've heard you speak too many times, like estrogen is the hormone for women as you get older to make sure it protects so many things. Tell me why estrogen in your mind is like that essential key hormone to make sure women age and get older healthier and not get sicker as they get older.
I really chafe at the term estrogen dominance because it infers that estrogen is a dominatrix of the worst kind. And it's really not understanding estrogen's roles in the body. Estrogen is extremely protective. It's just one of its possible actions is growth out of control. So they say if you have estrogen dominance, your boobs are bigger, your anger's bigger, but you're feeling worse, and that's all about balance. But the body is actually designed for estrogenic balance more than not. Hormones signal receptors. One receptor signals growth, but estrogen has 5 known receptors as of today. We think there's probably a lot more. And 4 of them signal controlled growth. So it's really, estrogen does many, many protective things. But when she's out of balance with herself, her other receptors, and the other hormones like progesterone, oxytocin, testosterone, then you can have adverse symptoms of not feeling that well. But it's not because estrogen is bad. I've been reading by certain writers that have a huge following on social media. I think we should address some of this, that estrogen sticks in your tissues and it can't get out and it's the villain. Wrong, not true. That you should only take estradiol and not, there's 3 major forms of estrogen: estrone, estradiol, and estriol. In fact, when Dr. Wright, who is my major mentor, first wrote the very first prescription for natural bioidentical hormones instead of writing a script for what everyone used back then, which was Premarin. And the term Premarin comes from pregnant mare's urine, Premarin. And he wanted to write a script for his patient for hormones. She said, well, I don't want estrogen from pregnant horse's urine. Can I get a natural one? So he wrote it for all 3 estrogens. So the very first script ever written for hormones was estrone, estradiol, estriol. But a lot of people online are saying you only need estradiol, when in actuality you need Biest. And men need estriol too. Men don't need just progesterone. Men need estriol too. Estrogen does many things, and it protects men just as well as women. For example, both men and women's hearts, the basic cell, the cardiomyocyte, is completely protected or healed after injury from estrogen being present. So a man doesn't want no estrogen, and a woman doesn't want 0 estrogen. But estrogen needs to be in balance. But often we give men that more gentle 1/8 the potency of estradiol called estriol. We often give that to men. But estriol mainly signals the second estrogen receptor. So the first one was alpha in the Greek alphabet, and the second one is beta. Anything that signals ER beta in most cases of the time acts to tamp down cancer or prevent cancer. So estriol is an anti-cancer estrogen. In fact, the scientist who discovered ER beta, Janaki Gustafsson, I worked with him when I was an distinguished estrogen scholar at Tulane. And he came out with papers on the 20th birthday of estriol and ER beta saying, why aren't gynecologists and oncologists using this for growth out of control? It can be protective for breast cancer, even the nasty glioblastoma brain cancer. Estriol protects against cancer and against inflammation, and it keeps our nervous system calm. It is a calming estrogen. So there's a lot of discussion online that you don't need estriol because your own estradiol will just naturally squirt you out some estriol. Well, David Rosensweet is a dear, dear colleague, friend of mine. We go back over 30 years in our relationship, and he decided to test hundreds of women, just giving them estradiol, and then test their estriol, which you can only test in the urine, to see if they actually made their own estriol out of estradiol. And for 5 years, he tested many, many women, and consistently women do not convert estradiol to estriol. So if you're taking a hormone replacement therapy, women need to get estradiol with estriol, and men can use estriol.
Got you. That's excellent. And I like what you said. There's different estrogen receptors, and there's an alpha and a beta. And like you said, there's 5 up to now. There's probably more, like you said. In certain forms of estrogen, i.e. estradiol and estriol, turn on those receptors and do more. And you're right. I've learned that estriol is very anti-inflammatory. It's like 40 times less potent than estradiol, but it's that unique effect on that beta receptor that does so much. I know there's some stuff about the gut. I mean, there's all that kind of stuff that, like you've mentioned before, is so important. And I do realize there's not a commercially available estriol. So I realize that is inhibitive. And that may be like, yeah, Steve, that's why you push it, because it has to go to a compounding pharmacy. But it all goes back to putting back in the body what the body made. And I can tell you, in terms of like doing estrogen compounds, there's really no to little cost of doing an estradiol compound versus a Biest compound. And you get both of those. And that's why it's so important. And I think that gets lost a lot nowadays, because we turned into this, well, let's just slap an estradiol patch on and let's go from there as far as that goes. So I thank you very much for bringing that out. I think that's so important.
You know, in this coming April of 2026, I'm putting on the very first Breast Cancer and Hormones in High-Risk Women conference. And one of the speakers that's going to speak for 2 hours is Rebecca Glasser. And Rebecca Glasser and Demetra Kakis have done all the very forward-thinking work of giving testosterone to breast cancer patients, because testosterone fights cancer. But why does testosterone fight cancer? Because testosterone is metabolized. It goes from testosterone to step 2 to step 3. So step 2 is DHT, dihydrotestosterone. Step 3 is a final metabolite of testosterone that looks exactly like estriol, and it signals ER beta. So they're just getting at ER beta from testosterone. So she has literally been treating breast cancer patients with the male-like version of estriol, and she's reversing breast cancer. She's even written some case reports in peer review of women who did not want to get standardized, not that I'm saying you shouldn't get standardized care, but of women who didn't get standardized care, only did testosterone, which breaks down eventually into something that is identical to estriol, and the woman went into remission with just that. That is how anti-cancer, whatever signals ER beta is. It's really, really fascinating when you get in this new class. We're going to talk about the different receptor physiology and how you can use food, nutrients, and hormones to turn things on and off and get the patient better, better, better. That's our goal.
Outstanding. Thank you so much for sharing that. That leads me right into the next part. I've been to a lot of allopathic traditional medicine. I went to a big gyno-uro symposium, and they're actually saying, okay, it's okay to give ladies who have breast cancer positive cancers in the past, actually vaginal estrogen now, because the data shows that actually can reduce their risk of further breast cancer. And so that gets me super excited because we've been fighting this battle, for me for years.
I know there's a black label warning on vaginal estrogen, right?
Yes.
That's what McCary just met. That was the first thing they dealt with at the congressional hearing. Yeah.
That's exactly right. So you've got a little bit of story. You've got a history of breast cancer. You've been on hormones for years. You've well studied this. Tell me your take on women who have breast cancer, whether it's estrogen sensitive or not, but your take on breast cancer in terms of hormone replacement. Where are you at nowadays? What's the science show?
So this is a bugaboo. It is a big bag of a bugaboo. It's a big mess, and there's a lot of emotional feelings on either side of all of this fence. And a lot of people, including Dr. Glasser, she only agreed to lecture at this conference if I stood up and clearly said she does not believe in estrogen. She wants the patient to have no estrogen. That was the only way that she would lecture on it. And Wayne Tilley from Australia, who might come, might not come, he's trying to get progesterone added to tamoxifen of all things. But he said the same thing. If you talk about any good things of estrogen, I don't think I'm coming. So there is this big anti-estrogen, so what I did for Rebecca Glasser, and I hadn't done this yet for Dr. Tilley, is said, well, what about what the science says? So there's 25 studies that were run from the mid-1980s to the mid-2000s. And we had the Women's Health Initiative that stopped in July of 2002 that told everybody estrogen causes cancer and heart disease. Doctors shouldn't write scripts for it. And litigious lawyers started suing doctors. We stopped teaching it in med school. So for about 20 years after the WHI, until the original authors in December of 2019, there were 15 reanalyses of the estrogen-only arm. And in 2019, the original authors did the final reanalyses of the women who were only taking estrogen without the synthetic progestin. And they said, we made a terrible mistake. Oops. Women who were on estrogen for an average of 5 years without the synthetic progestin had 23% reduction in getting breast cancer in the first place and a 40% reduction of dying from it, a fatality lowering incidence, which is unheard of. So then we learned that hormones were a lot more healthy. Really, it was a totally different story. But then the other thing that put hormones on the map was our own NIH did the largest study ever run on hormones in the world. It's on 10 million women who are 65 and older. And basically it's said they were all on Medicare. So they had all their files and they looked to see what hormones they were taking, how they got them into their body, and what diseases they had. And overall, older women on an average of estrogen for 5 years live 4 years longer. They have statistically less of multiple cancers, but the first top three are less breast cancer. Less breast cancer. They have less colorectal cancer. They have less lung cancer. They have less neurodegenerative disease. They have less hip fractures. They have higher quality of life. And then there's the 25 studies run from the 1980s to the mid-2000s. There were 25 studies where women with mild and moderate ER-positive breast cancer, so they see estrogen receptors on your tumor, were given estrogen, and they were tracked anywhere from 2 years to 36 years. The average study was 9 to 10 years of tracking what happened to these women. And they all had matched cohorts of women with similar age, similar tumor size. The only difference was those women did not go on hormone replacement. And they had a lot more of those ladies because everyone's scared to death of hormones. And the women on estrogen, every single study showed that the women lived longer, had less recurrence. If they did have recurrence, they had less death from recurrence, and they had higher quality of life. There wasn't one study out of 25 studies that showed that women did worse. So I sent these studies, the abstracts, in a PDF to Dr. Glasser, and I also sent it to Dr. Tilley. And I said, well, I know you will say that you don't like estrogen because it's good to have all the different medical opinions. But what do you think of these 25 studies where we literally took women with ER-positive breast cancer, gave them estrogen, and they did better consistently? And there was no comment. No one comments on that. And if you look through all of the science, there's no study that says that giving hormones to a breast cancer patient makes them worse. The only study that's referred to is the HABIT study, because the group of women who had ER-positive breast cancer on estrogen got an increased risk of breast cancer. But if you read the details in the bowels of this study, all of those women were on estrogen blockers. So they were given estrogen, but their bodies couldn't use it. Their Wi-Fi was frozen. They had frozen estrogenic Wi-Fi. So there is a huge bias against estrogen because it can promote growth, but it can also promote controlled growth, which are the signals to the second receptor, ER beta. But there's no science that says that estrogen is the bad bugaboo, but somehow it's become religiosity. It reminds me a lot of what's going on with vaccines, which we're not going to get into that. But vaccines have become very tainted with a religious kind of stance on it, rather than just looking, what does the science really say? So if you look at breast cancer science, the majority of the science does not show that women with breast cancer do worse with taking hormones. But you still, because standard of care is used in courtrooms, and they make it, if you don't do standard of care, a doctor's license is vulnerable. I think there needs to be, depending on the patient's cancer, the stage, the grade, etc., you need to really take a look at the order if you are going to give hormones. That's what we're going to be addressing in this conference. And but there is a lot of emotional bias against estrogen, and the science does not back that up. So I had breast cancer 33 years ago. I'm really happy I don't remember exactly how long. That's a very good sign.
Amen.
And I had a total hysterectomy because of other things. This was basically ultimately discovered to be due to my mother being given diethylstilbestrol when she was pregnant with me. The majority of the daughters exposed in the first trimester got breast cancer, all about the same exact year of age, actually, which mine was the same year of age. And I had already been eating organically and detoxing and exercising and supposedly doing everything right. And then I got breast cancer. And ultimately, I discovered that I was exposed, had a very toxic exposure, but in the utero when all my organs were developing. And because of diving into the literature, and I didn't anymore, I had no longer had hormone organs making my own hormones, I decided that I wanted to go on hormone replacement, and nobody stood me up. All my functional friends told me I would kill myself. Every time I go in every year to see my breast cancer surgeon, because they've got the best palpatory fingers and they didn't want to get a mammogram every single year. So I'd have them go in and palpate my breasts, and they'd look up at me and say, "You look better than any other breast cancer patient I have. You got to get off hormones." That was the mantra. You got to get off hormones. And I would watch them age in front of my very eyes while everyone comes up to me and tells me, "You're not aging the same way other people are aging." So I got on this journey. I'd already been on it from Dr. Wright being my mentor, but I have been diving into hormones Deeply, deeply, deeply. And then I wrote the book Hormone Deception, which was one of the very first books on how toxins can assault our hormones. And based on that book, I was invited to become a distinguished hormone scholar at Tulane, where I worked with the scientists who were discovering hormones and how they were under attack. So I have this academic background, this personal patient background, and then I've been teaching continuing medical education courses for decades now to all diverse genres of medicine. And so nobody has their finger exactly on everything that's happening with hormones. But I do know this. There's a lot of emotional bias against hormones and against estrogen. And it doesn't hold up if you read the science. And also if you look at the people teaching you. Look at the people aging in front of you. We just had two big anti-aging conferences. I'm in Austin, the home of all the podcasters. And most of our anti-aging conferences have people in their 20s and 30s and early 40s spouting all this stuff. Where are the people, I ask you, in their 80s and late 70s who have this energy, who've got this lubricated brain, who are doing it? And what are they doing to do it? Now, not everybody. What is her name? The glyphosate lady, Stephanie Seneff. So Stephanie Seneff, I had her on my podcast. She's got an incredibly lubricated brain. The only other woman I know with this lubricated same gray matter mass, but I don't know whether she's on hormones or not. But really, if you look at the people who have been on balanced hormones, and how they are aging in body, mind, and spirit, I think you got to do that rather than just stay Velcroed to, the stance that's not being supported by the science.
So grateful for your journey, and that's your passion spills out in what you've learned and how you want to educate. So that is so cool. And unfortunately, women have just really been cast away in terms of hormone replacement, because this is the next question I get, and I want to get your take, and that is, hey, I'm unfortunately, because of women's health initiative, I've been denied hormones all these years, but now I'm in my 70s and 80s. Is it too late for me to start? What's that estrogen window to see benefit? What is your take on that, Dr. Berkson?
You're doing such great questions, Steve. You are hot. You are really hot on this. That is an important question. I hear this all the time. In fact, just at A4M, they had a cardiologist lecture there, and he said if a woman is in her late 70s and she hasn't been on hormones, she can't be on hormones because she's missed her estrogen window. So first of all, let's break this down into the science versus the emotional bias. That's what hormones, you have to look at hormones, what's emotional and what's science. So I had that doctor on my show, and there was so much of what he quoted and said that was not really backed up by real science. It was shocking. It's only his theory. He's a Harvard gynecologist, and he came up with this estrogen theory. It is a theory. The theory is, and it came out because you do get more bang for your hormone buck if you start your replacement in your perimenopause or your very early postmenopause journey. The earlier you start hormones, the longer you get benefit. We've now proven if you take hormones for 5 years, 20 years down the road, your bones are better. If you take hormones for 5 years, something in your brain that tends to stroke out in your 80s, more vulnerable to stroke, it's protected from stroke. We know you get more protection, but from that, they hypothesized that you get worse if you start hormones later, but that has not been my clinical experience at all. So I've always worked collaboratively with medical practices where I've gotten, even though I don't have the prescriptive rights in my own licensure, I've been able to, in essence, work with hormones with patients directly. And we have initiated hormone replacement in women in their 90s, their late 90s. We've reversed osteoporosis in women in their 90s, gotten them off a huge list of medications and shortened that list, got them from being emotionally isolated to being more social again, totally changed their lives. The whole idea that you can't start hormones, you've missed the window, is wrong. The only thing is because hormones often speak to receptors, but they actually also speak now to membranes. That's a new wrinkle that we didn't know a while ago. The receptors go to sleep after you don't have hormones in your body for a while. So they become what we call senescent. And you just, the first year that you give hormones back, they're a little overreactive because they're waking up out of a deep sleep. So whenever somebody goes on hormone replacement, you need to have a provider that knows to move very, very slowly, more slowly than you do with a typical patient, and also have a really in-depth cardiac workout before you initiate hormones. And that's a whole involved reason why. But, working with that, and you can start hormones at any age, but that's a great question, an important question, because almost all women get the wrong answer.
That's so cool. I would say anybody who started this podcast on the fence about hormones, hearing all the data and all the stats, and more importantly, the science that you've thrown out about hormones, really has to sit and think, okay, why aren't I on hormones? And I need to go talk to my prescriber about that. So I really feel like you've done such a great job in helping patients understand the importance of hormones and the role they'll play. You are a phenomenal educator. You do so much. If people want to learn more about you, Dr. Berkson, and the work you do, where can they find out more about you?
Oh, great question. And by the way, no, honestly, you ask amazing questions and you keep everything so organized, because that's not easy to do, because you're talking with me and you're thinking what you're going to ask next, but you've done a really great job. So I feel like this conversation has been very hormonally balanced.
I would agree. And it's probably because I pay attention to my hormones too. So thank you very much. I appreciate that.
Yeah, you look in really great shape. And that's what you want. I don't want to go to a provider that looks, or listen to somebody online that looks, look and listen on all levels, body, mind, spirit, and your gut. What do you think about what this person in front of you is telling you? And does it sound balanced? Okay. So if people want to, if you kind of like me and you don't want to throw tomatoes at me, my website is drlindseyberkson.com, drlindseyberkson.com. And you can scroll down. I've got a really cool called V to V, which stands for vindication, vilified to vindicated, about estrogen. Why was she hated? And how can we now embrace her and love her? And I have that simplified, and how to pick a really great provider. So if you just scroll down on the first page, you can see the course that I gave with Dr. Brownstein, Everything Hormones, and pretty soon we'll be advertising Everything Breast Cancer. And also my new book, my 22nd book, is coming out, called Oxytocin Medicine, and that's coming out soon. We're working on the landing page of that right now. And I also write almost every morning, about 4 or 5 mornings a week, in something called Substack. And I moved to Substack because I had a podcast and I started getting banned, and I got many, many podcasts taken down. One, I was talking with David Brownstein about hormones, and I don't know, we were poo-pooing somebody. I don't know, the word abortion must have just shown up. We weren't really talking. That show got ripped away because you couldn't even talk about. I had about 45 shows taken down, which is hours and hours and hours of work. And then they threatened my bank account. So I stopped my podcasts for a while. I thought, well, at least I must have been making a difference, I guess. But I will probably be relaunching on TikTok and my podcast pretty soon, maybe once the cancer conference is over. And so I write on Substacks now because that platform is not censorable. And we have a lot of fun there. And the focus is hormones, nutrition, and what's happening. Today, health is very political. So I don't know how you don't somewhat talk about politics with health, but everybody's got their own viewpoint of all that. And I've got, of course, my own viewpoint, and it's my Substack. So you might like my viewpoint, or you might throw tomatoes at my Substack. So
I can't see anybody doing that to you. That would not be very fair. Well, most importantly, hey, I think when you get your oxytocin book out, I'd love to have you back on, because I'm kind of an oxytocin fan for all the wonderful things it does. So
Steve, it's coming out in a few weeks. So let's do this. Would you, because definitely get in touch with me, because we want to let everybody know about this. It's pretty exciting. And in fact, in I make a case. Why is there so much violence in today's world? Whenever have you had children going into a church, into a school, shooting other children, other people praying to God? When have we ever seen this? And I make a case for oxytocin being the most vulnerable hormone to endocrine disruption, and also modern birthing practices. And I explain what oxytocin does in each system of the body and how it can be used as nasal sprays. And in fact, it's even sold over the counter by Walmart, of all things. And the Walmart version of oxytocin is so helpful. I thought how could anything be really, going to be helpful for a patient that they purchase at Walgreens? I was keynote speaker for PCCA in Calgary about a year and a half ago, and they were saying, well, during the pandemic, they couldn't get a hold of Pitocin, so they started using the Walmart oxytocin. I was like, and it worked better. They're still using it. So you can get some of this on your own, and you also can get it compounded for various things. And the last chapter of that book is how your provider can write the compounded scripts for about 20 different conditions to your compounding pharmacist to be able to order it from you. Everything from gut erosions and not being on acid blockers to GLP-1, appetite control. So that kind of a thing.
All right. Well, you've committed to be on another podcast, so I'll definitely have you on. Dr. Berkson,
that's
thank
not
you
the
so
only
much.
place I'm committed. No,
no, that's okay. But no, I really appreciate today you really coming on and dispelling so many myths about hormones, talking about the latest science. And like you said, more importantly, your passion to take complicated and make it easy to understand. And you did such a great job of that today. And like you said, for those just moving forward, if you found this helpful, please share it with your friends and family. Be sure to give us a like, write your comments, like you said, because that's what helps patients learn more. And that's what this whole podcast is about. That's getting out quality information. But, thank you so much for being here today. I am so, so grateful.
Oh, I really appreciate having the chance for this conversation. And it's also on my part to have somebody ask such intelligent questions with such a great flow. Sometimes the conversations can get constipated, but we had regularity, man.
We had regularity. That's exactly it. So thank you so much. Like you said, for everybody that listens, keep seeking the truth about how the body works. Have a great day.